analysis. The EU regulation proposal came in December 2020, and it is already shaping the key developments within the battery market. Now, 4 months on, it's a good time to take a stock on the proposal and discuss the implications for Norway. We are delighted to note that we have a great lineup, and we will keep it short and concise and end in 1 hour, so by 1 p.m. We will have an open discussion at around 12:30, and you are welcome to use the chat function to ask questions, or simply add a comment to the chat so that others can see and read, and we take a note of it. So use the chat, not the Q&A. And please also note that this event is recorded. And with that, let us start with the first item on the agenda, a conversation between Frank Andersen, Managing Director of Battery Norway, and Stina Torjussen, Associate Professor at the University of Agder. So I leave it to you.
Thank you so much, Lars Petter. I'm really happy to be able to talk to Fredrik Andersen about this issue. And I think we'll go straight in, Fredrik. So when it comes to the regulations, so which aspects of the proposed regulation has Battery Norway seen as the most, or have you been most pleasantly surprised by, would you say?
Well, first of all, it's really about time to have an update on the regulation, and that itself is going to be a regulation and not a directive. I see also as a strength. In general, I think the key targets, for collection rates, it's good. That's an upside, and I also think that the mandatory traceability requirements, the battery passport, there's a lot of good things there as well. But also there are some complicating things. So but in general, I think the passport and the traceability aspect is maybe the two most significant impacts we see as positive.
Great. And when it comes to the problematic sides, I mean, do you have any major concerns, or?
Yeah, I do. I do. I'm a bit concerned about if we are going to reinvent the wheel once again, regarding a separate system for reporting on EV batteries. In Norway, we already have that today, together with Co2 and Battery Norway. So that is not only from my side, but also from the car industry. They don't want an additional reporting system because we already have something they're working today.
Yeah, so it'll be a duplication in a sense.
Yeah, and cost driving, resource demanding.
And exactly, and which wouldn't necessarily kind of advance the field. It wouldn't make it more environmentally, or it wouldn't add any value in any.
No, not really. Not really.
It's pure duplication. Interesting. Good. And then when it comes to the recycled content, where do you stand there? I mean, there is considerable debate when you read. This is something Therese Birkeland works a lot on. When you read the hearings, you see that there are quite kind of differing opinions. Some are very optimistic and very kind of in favor of the mandatory recycled content. Others are very concerned that there will not be available quantities in the timeline that is stipulated. Where do you stand in that debate?
Yeah, well, we stand two places. First of all, we need to be really clear on where to be measured on collection, what's available for collection. It's good politics to just say we should collect everything, but then we need to know, okay, what's available for collection before we measure anyone. Yeah, that's one thing. At the same time, what is super important to achieve the goals for recycled content and recovery is that we keep the material in Europe. If we don't do that, the targets in the regulation, in my view, is really not doable. As long as we see the material goes to the Far East, but we are also now seeing competition from North America, which means that even more of the material can go to North America and China, and then it's in Chinese batteries and American batteries, not European batteries.
Exactly. So, and has there been enough measures, either in this regulation or other kind of policy measures from the European Union or the major nation states to to really make sure that that there is not this kind of leakage to Asia in it. That's really lacking. That's what you're saying.
That's really lacking in my point of view. This is where we really have to keep on pushing, keep on lobbying, keep on working. And I will spend a lot of my time on this for our stakeholders as well, of course, the next few months, because this is not clear in my view.
Yeah.
And it's the key element.
Yeah, great, interesting. And what would be the ideal scenario there? I mean, I'm not if to the extent that you could comment, but would there be an additional article in the regulation that would kind of make this more problematic, or is that feasible? So what types of measures could we envision on that?
That's a long discussion, but because there is competition law involved here, there's a lot of different trade agreements involved. But it needs to be at least more transparent and traceable.
Right.
Well, if we can trace it, we can do something about it, maybe in politics or legislation. But we also know that what is the correct measurements we should put on European stakeholders here.
Right. Exactly. So that's what you're saying. So if we had, and once we get a better overview, you think the next step will be that we will manage this better.
Exactly.
And how do you see the Chinese actors and Asian actors in this? I mean, are there any efforts from them as well to kind of keep these flows going, or are the quantities in the Asian market so high that it's not a major issue for them, it's more a major issue for us in Europe?
No, we see Chinese actors or Asian actors in general in Europe, and we also see the materials have gone back to the Far East through Indonesia, and then back to China and also to Korea. So they are here. They've been here for a long time, and they will be here for the foreseeable future as well. Yes. So then that's why we need to fulfill that. They also have the same requirements and fulfill the requirements that we as European producers will also have to fulfill. So it needs to be equal competition. Exactly.
Great. Good. And you note, as we started, you mentioned the battery passport briefly, so that we will be able to trace and really acquire sophisticated information on every single battery, including the whole kind of life cycle assessment information. So from where you are, for Battery Retur and also Hydrovolt, so could you tell us a bit more about the future, in a sense, or where is the battery passport kind of going? What kind of form will it take? How do you relate to it? What is it? What can we kind of give us an insight into where the whole battery passport is moving?
Yeah, well, first of all, the initial battery passport will be, let's say, complicated to achieve, because then we have this common goal on everything being on the passport, but we have to take into consideration there is also IP here and protected developed industry secrets as well. So the passport needs to be clear on the carbon footprint. It needs to be clear on the recycled content in the cell level and also in the pack level. In my point of view, I think it's mainly focused on the recycled content in the cell. But we also should look into, like, for example, the aluminum on pack level. It's also recycled aluminum from earlier. So back to not reinventing the wheel, we still have a lot of data today that can be very relevant to create a really good battery passport. But this needs to be foreseen across industries, not only the battery industry. We need to look also to producers of raw materials, of course.
Exactly, and the dialogue there. And when it comes to the IT side of it, the actual kind of development of the IT solutions for this, is that moving at a kind of satisfactory pace?
No, I don't think so. But for now, it's more or less some producer is doing what they are doing, and another one is doing what they are doing. I think we need to get more into to open our discussions and do this together. But then, of course, we need to understand that we will have a battery passport with maybe a bit shallow information, because we don't want to share everything, of course. That's
exactly. And getting that. So exactly. So the solutions needs to be very sophisticated. That, in fact, I mean, they give exactly the right amount amount of information there, even if they could give more, right?
I have many thoughts on this, Dina, and one of them are to, of course, create one huge platform which many others can integrate to, and always share the relevant data to ensure that the battery passport is as good as possible.
Yeah,
but this is a long discussion.
I'm sure, exactly. And the role of the authorities there, both kind of say on the Norwegian side or other big European nations, or even kind of the Brussels and the EU side. I mean, are there any things that you see missing there in order to create the right momentum on the battery?
I won't say directly missing, but I maybe like the ambition of auditing, of controls. I would like to see learn more about how they see that, how to ensure equal competition in the future. That's one of the important topics from our side, that competition is great, but it needs to be on equal terms. Right, exactly. Someone needs to ensure that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, on my side, I think the whole idea of the battery passport, I think it's really interesting, kind of as a political scientist or as an observer of the European politics on this. It really kind of, here the European deal really comes together. It's kind of the European deal in a nutshell. You know, you have the European deal really wants us to have this twin transition of both green and digital, and here exactly is the case where you're going to have the use, you know, like an expanding and developing digital sector that could really kind of help us achieve these really green targets, right? Both ethical sourcing and also in order to give us the right information on recycling, etc. So it'll be really interesting. I think it's an interesting test case for the, not to talk in too large a term, but it does really connect very well to, it's a very, very specific example of these larger ambitions, I think, in the European Green.
Absolutely, and Sefcovic and his team has also stated really clear that they see the battery regulation now as kind of a framework for future legislation in the European Union as well. Yeah. So let's do this right this time.
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. That's my sense as well. That this kind of sustainable product legislation, that this really will be the model, I think, and so that makes it particularly interesting to study. And to move us to another theme there. So where we are now, with the kind of the status of it, as we know, and as Lasbeth said in the beginning, you know, it was put forward in December. It now has this kind of initial round of discussions in the European Council, in other arenas, and we're hopefully moving towards an adoption fairly soon. But once it is adopted, or once it is kind of ratified, there will be a second round of what is called secondary legislation. So a lot of the details will really be worked out after the first round, or the first proposal. And what's important there in the secondary legislation, as you understand it, and not least from a Norwegian side, where do we need to be proactive, and how do we need to be proactive?
Yeah, I think it's important that this, let's call it the under directives of the regulation, it's adaptable to the respective markets. Because as Norway is a front runner in many ways on electrification, and of course on what the Battery and Hydrovolt are involved in, this is important, but not all other countries are at the same maturity. So we need to maybe have different local directives to regulate this as good as possible, and also to secure, of course, equal competition terms. So I don't think we can have one regulation fits all.
So you would want to kind of fast track and kind of slow track type of mechanism within it, in a sense.
Yeah, you could call it that. You could call it that. I think you should be rewarded for being an early mover, but you should also be rewarded for daring to take risks. And to do that, you need let's call it local adaptations in the regulation.
Yeah, good. Interesting. And then on a more general note, my question is really, how would you rate the Norwegian government and Norwegian stakeholders' ability to understand, shape, and contribute to policy making in Brussels? Do we get it?
Yeah, well, I can only speak on behalf of myself and our members and shareholders and owners, and everyone looks to Norway.
Yeah.
due to electrification. And we have gained a lot of experience of that in Brussels. I get a lot of requests to talks with the legislators, etc. Here from Brussels.
Yeah.
Let's use this to engage and contribute. Let's use this position here as well.
Interesting.
And this is not only for electric vehicles, it's also for the marine sector with the Co2 and Siemens and what's happening there. There's a lot of good initiatives from Norway, which they are super interested in Brussels. And it's opened a lot of doors for us, that I can say. And we are seeking to use those doors to try to engage and contribute for the future legislation from Brussels.
Great, interesting, super. So we're nearing the end. We have one interesting question from Nada Kishore, who asks, is there a timeline to implement the battery passports? How exactly would these look? So we talked a little bit about the form of it, but what would you say on the timeline?
Well, the timeline is not really defined yet, I think. But we could start doing this now. As soon as we start cell production, we should start using it.
Exactly, and as Northvolt as well will be doing, right? So
like Northvolt is doing it. They are trying to thrive and be ahead of the legislation because if you do that, then you can also be a big part of shaping it. So absolutely, let's do it right now.
Good. Nada also asks, is it going to be online only or a hard copy? So again,
as far as I see it, it's going to be a marking on the cell or the pack or the module. A traceability number. It could be a QR code, and then you have a platform that ensures that the passport is on that platform.
Great. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much, Fredrik. I think that was a very, very helpful insights from you. So thank you. And let's now move forward to the second part of this 1 hour. We now have a set of short comments, really, from 3 important and interesting companies. So first out is Nils Walland from Corvus Energy Norway, Senior Vice President for Supply Chain. Nils, you're very welcome. Please give us your perspectives on the regulation.
Yeah, thank you. I think my comments is going on the carbon footprint measurements and how it's this regulatory measurement is implicated. Being one of those in between the cell producers and the solution users, it's of course a lot of issues. How do you do it? We are a lot focused on total energy delivered versus battery capacity used, which is kind of hard to make universal applied for all the industries that are trying to get this electrification going. And what is the life cycle to kind of measure it on? And who is addressed? Is it the cell maker? Is it us as ESS producers? Or is it the solution users? Or is it the end user? Of course, on the carbon footprint, it's easy to make it on the cell maker, but there is a lot of things going on from the cell maker until the passenger is moved from A to B. So, we often say that grid installation are our neighbors in this, and the EVs is a distant family that we don't really relate to very much. So it's a lot of I'm occupied on how would I solve that carbon footprint. They have a threshold and compliance to a threshold for the maximum life cycle. But the maximum life cycle, what is that altogether? It's quite different from our applications to some of the EV applications. So I see a lot of challenges there. I do support Fredrik a lot on the what I call the dead end requirements, so on how to put circular economics into the recycling of this. And I think rewards that circular economics has to find some kind of rewards to the innovative and improving parties like them, and that is also a challenge. How will they pay themselves and so forth. So there's a lot of questions in my regard. One thing I'm very confident about is is actually one of the things that are coming through here, and that is all of us should have a lot of requirements to our battery management system and our control of the state of health and how batteries are. We have a lot of our success related to the second life usage that we are trying to define for our packages. And that is quite different from our possibilities than EV possibilities and so forth. We do see a real second life usage possibility that kind of prolongs the battery capacity used to deliver as much as possible energy in the lifetime. So
interesting, yeah. And that second use would be maritime related or any?
You would have in any sailing pattern, the package is built up to kind of last as long as possible and give the right kind of sailing patterns supported by full electricity. At a certain stage, those batteries are not good enough for that package, and then they can be placed on shore to kind of ensure and optimize both the harvesting and the giving of energy at the charging situation. So you have a second life just on the outside of the ship when it's charging. So
interesting. Where it moves naturally.
This is not a 1 + 1 = 2 game, to put it that way.
Great, very good. Thank you so much, Nils. That was very interesting perspectives there, and not least, having that maritime perspective is really helpful. So then next one out is Dr. Gunstein Skomedal. Gunstein is an energy material scientist and product manager at Elkem. Please, Gunstein, give us the Elkem perspective on the regulation.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Stina, for inviting me here. Just very quickly about us, Elkem has recently split out Elkem Advanced Battery Materials this year as an own unit to really push forward effort on working on battery materials. So what we're doing in Elkem Advanced Battery Materials is producing synthetic graphite. It's basically a black powder, and in every battery you have around, for each kilowatt hour of battery, you have 1 kilo of this material. And the reason I mention it is because most of this is produced in China today with very, very high energy consumption, and also, of course, a large degree of coal power in the mix. So going back to CO2 footprint, it is one of the most biggest contributor to the CO2 footprint of a battery today. So and this is like to produce this graphite in high quality for EVs, you need more energy than you would need for aluminum smelting. So it's really typical process industry, and that's also why this is something we would like to set up in Norway. We have plans to start production at Herøya in 2023 if everything works fine. We see a big interest from especially European actors, OEMs and cell manufacturers, because they already see today that synthetic graphite production and raw materials into lithium-ion batteries carries along a huge backpack of CO2 emissions in its life cycle. And with our process, we have developed an energy efficient process to reduce the energy consumption, while we also can use Norwegian hydropower. We can really slash the CO2 footprint of the synthetic graphite by more than 90%. That leads me kind of into our interest into this battery directive, because we are, of course, supporting all kinds of regulations that promotes and rewards production of important factors into a battery in a more environmental friendly way with less impact. And of course, CO2 is one of the most important categories there. So this is really one of the important things here, and we really think that a successful implementation of this battery directive would help to make Elkem products more attractive, strengthen Elkem's position in the European market, because today all synthetic graphite and all this anode material in a battery comes more primarily from China and have a complete dominance of that. So both environmental perspective, supply risk perspective, and so on, it's important for Europe that we are able to move more of the value chain, and we see that this directive is one step towards a situation where you can also get rewarded for those lanes. Also, recycling is something we're working on. Today, synthetic graphite is not recycled, it's just burned in a battery. They just recycle the cobalt, the nickel, the valuable elements. So we think, requirements for increased recycle content will also promote that you want to recycle also other parts of the batteries back to high value products. So that's also something we, of course, will support. The only thing I can say, which kind of is a bit something we really need to be careful, and I think the next speaker will also comment on this, is how do we calculate and how do we document the CO2 footprint? And that's something we really have to be careful about going forward, especially when it comes to scope 2 emissions related to energy production, where we say we have 100% hydropower, where we do our production at Herøya in Co2. So of course, this is a discussion, a market-based solution versus localized-based solution. So talk too much about that, but that's things we have to really work on and make sure that the direct use of renewable energy is actually rewarded.
Great, interesting. And I think that's a very nice transition to our next speaker, Elise Must, Vice President, Head of Strategy and Sustainability at Hydro. Please, Elise, I think this resonates with your perspectives as well on the regulation.
It does indeed, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and comment. First and foremost, Hydro welcomes the proposal from the European Commission on a battery regulation and increased sustainability and transparency in the battery value chain that we believe that this will bring. So we're positive. I'll highlight some selected topics. There are several topics we can talk about here as both opportunities and challenges linked to them. And first, what Gunstein was also touching upon, the mandatory carbon footprint declaration, which I think is a clear opportunity for Hydro and for Norway with our access to clean energy. But methodology choices will be crucial here, and all these methodology choices will be developed through delegated acts, which are generally less transparent than other processes. So having broad stakeholder involvement and transparency on these processes are crucial. Just to pinpoint some of the challenges here, which is also what Gunstein talked about, we see a clear need to linking renewable energy sources to the production as opposed to using guarantees of origin, which will in essence dilute the competitive advantage that Norway has. We also see the need to be able to use primary data across the value chain, again reflecting what others have said here today, because the carbon footprint is not only relevant for the cell manufacturing, but it's also very much for the raw material production, as Alkem also clearly highlighted. So that's one aspect. The second aspect that we also welcome is the responsible and ethical sourcing and the supply chain due diligence. We believe that will help level playing field and reduce risk. But once more, here the details are important. It needs to be built on existing international standards. It needs to be a risk-based approach, and there needs to be clarity on what is expected. These current international standards on, for instance, human rights due diligence are not super clear on what you need to do when. So the clearer, the better. And there also need to be a very good alignment with all the current legislation and reporting requirement, as Fredrik also clearly highlighted in the beginning. That's absolutely crucial, so we don't overburden companies with overlapping requirements. Finally, I'd like to also highlight the recycled content, which we also think is very important for the circular economy as such. And here, targets should really be based on thorough and robust analysis of availability of secondary material in the market. And there should be a lot of focus on making sure that the material stays in Europe, as we also heard Fredrik underline. So overall, this is important. We really support it. It's important to maintain ambitious targets and timelines in this process. It is ambitious currently, but it should be maintained. And then we as actors should all make sure we get involved in the development of the details there in the delegated acts. Thank you very much.
Very good, great, very interesting. And I see that Adele Sheridan of SINTEF is commenting and really agreeing with what you're saying, Elise. She's commenting in the chat to the panelists that that it's kind of identified in both the Batteries Europe and the Battery European Partnership that there's a need for better life cycle analysis and CO2 footprint evaluation of batteries. At the moment, the source data is not adequate for robust analysis. So really indicating the source data as a key challenge related to what you're saying there, Elisa. So thank you, Adele. I think that's a very good point. And before we move to the final input from Ole Thomas Thomasson, just again encourage you to use the chat rather than the Q&A. Use the chat and feel free to comment or flag questions that you want us to address now as we move into the open discussion section. That's just very welcome. But so we've had these three perspectives now from the industry. And with that, we move to Ole Thomas Thomasson, who's a senior advisor in the Norwegian Environment Agency. So Ole Thomas, please share your perspectives on the regulation.
Thank you, Stina. First of all, we agree with everyone else that this is a very important proposal to give a good foundation for a comprehensive and ambitious policy framework. Also for us, it's very interesting as it is the first regulation proposal coming out of the European Green Deal. And we're happy to note that it links all environmental problems, climate, products, waste treatment, chemical management, etc. In a very good way, and that it will be a good blueprint for future regulations on other fields as well, not just for batteries. And we note that for now, this is a very high-level proposal. The details, and the devil is in the details, will come later in the delegated acts. Well, just short, I think I'll mention some topics that we have highlighted in our work towards Brussels. We're very happy to see the mandatory supply chain due diligence obligations. Further on the climate footprint, we agree that it should be based on life cycle assessment principles, and that care should be given so that relevant actors in the single market, both inside and outside of the EU, use a similar methodology so we don't get any competitive unfairnesses. Further, we look forward to the product passports. I think that's very interesting, and will also, be important for other products than batteries. We note that intellectual property rights, cybersecurity, and confidential business sensitive information is very important, which some actors have been, telling us in our public consultations. Also requiring the use of secondary raw materials in new products. We think that is an exciting way to stimulate the circular economy, and look forward to seeing how that will look in the delegated acts. Also, we think it handles the process for the restriction of further hazardous substances in batteries in a good way, and that links well into the REACH regulations. And we're also happy to see that it looks like it will be setting the same requirements to treat discarded batteries in an ESM manner outside as well as within Europe, which is a good thing. So I think that's, I don't have much time, so I think that's it for now.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's very helpful, Ole Thomas. So thank you for these really kind of four perspectives, and we have Fredrik as well in the beginning. And just to kind of follow up a bit on what you've said. And maybe this is to you, Elisa. So clearly there is this kind of methodological issue here, really at the center. So do you noted that we need to be we need to kind of trace the process, make, you know, we want it to be transparent. We want, you know, the different companies to be able to contribute and comment. But is there something that Norway should do in terms of kind of moving forward and develop the methodologies that needs to be there in place? Is there something that we can do either from the academic side or from the government side or the company side to kind of take this into our own hands, or should we kind of sit back and comment when we're asked to comment? What do you think, Elisa?
I think it's important to be proactive in these processes because it will give you impact if you are. Obviously, we all actors need to prioritize. There's a lot of delegating acts that will be set in force here, and we all need to prioritize which are the most important ones. But collaborating across the industry in Norway on common interests and making sure that we align and sort of also go as one force where we have overlapping interest, I think is very important. And I think it's then crucial to actually pick some of these processes and proactively engage. I do.
Yeah, interesting. Good. And if we go back to Fredrik I'm interested in if you have a general comment, Fredrik, to the others, so feel free to do that if you want to. And then a specific comment from Paul Frisvold that kind of follows up really on, you were saying, okay, we do actually get a lot of attention from Brussels. They want to know, they're asking us for input. And Paul is asking, is there any specific competences we have from the Norwegian side that we can bring to that? So, Fredrik.
Yeah, well, the general comment can be that as you all hear, there is a lot of agreed around the proposed regulation. I also want to say to Thomas and Miljødirektoratet that they are also listening, and that's good. Talk to the industry, talk to us. That will give us all a good proposition to form the future legislation together. When it comes to what Norway has that is relevant for Brussels, of course, it's based on experience from my world in the battery scrap world, where you have the complications on regulatory. It can be one thing, but it can also be on transportation issues, that the ADR requirements are, well, the technology has passed the legislation years ago, and that's probably the main issue. And there we have a lot of experience on, how to propose this should be, because we've done it for a decade now. So it's experience based.
Great. Thanks. And then another point to pick up on again from you, Elisa. You were noticing the one interesting side with these really stepped up requirements for having to inform and having to improve the ethical sides to sourcing materials, so particularly pertaining to social and environmental challenges related to mining of minerals. And I think you're very right to point out that they're really just bringing in the already established general frameworks, global frameworks for accounting for ethical sourcing, but they are very superficial. Do you think there needs to be a kind of sector specific, so kind of that the industries themselves, or the industry branch organizations on a national or perhaps a European level, that they need to move forward here? Who's the best position to kind of take that issue forward, you think, Lisa?
I think we should also be a bit careful to be too linked to batteries as such as an industry, because there will be other legislation here covering other aspects of all our industry, and the importance is the alignment with current legislation and current standards. And if you ask who are the right ones to bring forward and make sure that this becomes sort of well functioning, maybe even those that are experts on international standards and legislations are the ones that should really work on this. But we also need our associations and those that can represent us. That's clear.
Exactly, good. And I think there will be a lot of issues here moving forward. I know there are specific initiatives in German and within German politics to bring kind of German legislation here, and there might be kind of pioneering initiatives on on a national level as well here. Let's see how that works out. So thank you for that, Elisa. We have one very specific question, Gunstein, and here I'm calling on you as a scientist. There is a question on just the kind of minimum levels of mercury and cadmium. Is there an acceptable level, or is it 0? My understanding is that the directive is portraying a path where eventually there will be no mercury and cadmium in the batteries. Is that makes sense from your perspective as well, Gunstein?
Yeah, and also that we are kind of mixing it a bit, because mercury and cadmium is mostly related to other types of battery types than lithium-ion batteries, which is kind of the big change now with the battery directive. It's it's different types of batteries and different types of chemistries. That's kind of usual what the battery directive basically have been covered before. Heavy on lead acid batteries and so on. So I'm not too updated on these things. I think that's something maybe Battery Norway can answer more on specifics on those details. But I think it's important to understand that we are kind of, with a new battery directive, moving into all kinds of different new chemistries, new processes, and other kinds of impacts than the old battery directive was meant for.
Interesting. That's a very interesting point. So, and this is also a point that I've taken from Therese Birkeland as well, where the point that the technologies are moving so fast, and then the question is whether the regulation is kind of open enough in order to incorporate that, or it moves quickly enough. But as we stand now in 2021, do you see, Gunstein, that as is it flexible enough to really account for these major shifts that we might see in if we look at it kind of technology-wise?
Yeah, I think the new proposal is flexible enough, and it's as we have seen, it's planned that it will be several iterations, and it is a process. It's not set in stone. It's going to be a process of many years, and also the things will happen, of course, during that time. It's a lot of focus on specific elements that needs to be recycled and so on. This may in the future. We don't know. So it's important for the regulation to take into consideration the enormous shift in technology that will happen in the next decade.
Good. And Nils, would you kind of concur on that point from a kind of the maritime side? Is it sufficiently flexible for you? And again, the amazing developments you're seeing within your sector. I mean, you touched on it already, but
I'm a little bit afraid of the over eagerness to kind of regulate ourselves into the right kind of battery industry that we have to get into. Yeah. Because being one of those in betweens, taking cells and providing them for the solutions, I cannot ignore that most of the solutions users will look at the most affordable way of getting green, and they are green in themselves. So yeah, I'm occupied by the over eagerness to make battery greens instead of the use green, and the effect that we can get by doing this. And at the same time, I have to respect that from A to Z, and I have to have A to C that I understand. Yeah, that is on conflict minerals, that is on carbon footprint, of course, because I think, as I addressed, the carbon footprint is it's probably the hardest one, because the effect of these batteries are quite large with regards to carbon footprint in themselves, and then there is a balance between that and the carbon footprint of the raw materials and the cell making. So yeah, for me it's complicated.
Yeah, no, good to hear that. And one issue of complication that I think we do need to address, given the media, the stories we had in Norwegian media last week, and this goes to you, Ole Thomas. So the big news item last week was really on Norwegian batteries or Norwegian battery content being potentially exported to Britain, but with the new Brexit agreement, there will be potential fees for British cars going on the European market and vice versa, and that is a challenge for Norwegian the new battery industry. Lars Petter Malpi and I, we had a small comment in Finansavisen where we noted this challenge, but also pointing to the fact that this clause in the Brexit agreement is there really in order to kind of help support the buildup of the European battery industry, and very much there to kind of avoid Asian batteries going into British cars, so that you kind of undermine the European the buildup of the European battery industry from that side. And that's really the intention as we read it with this clause. So it's not a kind of anti-Norwegian clause, but it does hurt us. So is that a correct interpretation? And what's your kind of further comment on this issue? Is it a challenge? Is it not a challenge? And can it be solved? And will it be solved in a reasonable amount of time?
Thanks for giving me the general Norwegian government question. I represent the Environment Agency, and this is really a bit outside of our scope, I think.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And I'm not a Brexit EU legislation expert.
Yeah.
But of course, if it's true, it is a big deal, I would assume, for the Norwegian industry. And I have noticed in some documents that it is being, handled between the Norwegian government and Brussels. So I hope that it will be solved. And I don't think the intentions have been to, limit the Norwegian influence on the market in the EU or the UK. So hopefully it can be solved, but I really don't have any idea, more idea than that.
Very good. Good to know. And it's an interesting case, and I think it's a kind of it also shows you, I think, the interplay between politics and markets in this sector. I mean, it is really a sector where I think several industries are playing a key role, the car industry, but I think also the way in which this market is regulated, it's hugely significant, and the kind of the Brexit agreement is just one additional example of how regulation or politics and markets really interplay or come into play in kind of fostering this new major.
I want to support Ole Thomas from the other end of this spectrum. Yeah. Over eagerness is of course also a problem in politics, and this is I think we will easily run into those kinds of sub problems that is other parties, and if it's nations or it's industries, it's over eagerness in any negotiations about frameworks are very difficult.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a very sound point. Okay, so with that, I think we are kind of moving. We're kind of closing our open discussion. Let me know any of you that's contributed so far. Do you have any? Are there any things we've missed? Any things we should add to this? Fredrik, Gunste, any kind of final thoughts we need to kind of take with us before we move to the final section of this hour?
No, I would just like to say that you once again you see the joint strengths here through Battery Norway is one thing, but the industry is really. I really feel we can work together to create some good solutions here for the future industry, and sustainability is one of our key targets for all of us. So, yeah, let's keep up the good work in across all the industries, and with the help of Ole Thomas and Miljødirektoratet, this will be great. I'm pretty sure.
Excellent. Good to hear that. So with that, before we go to the final section, I'll just alert you to. A good point by Kristin Holter from Ruter, the head of circular economy at Ruter, and one of our leading figures in Norway, I would say, on ethical sourcing and the circular economy and sustainability in general. So I'm happy we have a comment from you, Kristin, and you're just noticing that the proposed Norwegian legislation on åpenhetsloven is highly relevant regarding expectations on human rights due diligence. So that will really feed into this discussion as well. So with that, I think we should then have a summary by Therese Birkeland, our PhD student who's studying European battery policy making in Brussels. So Therese, what's your kind of takeaway from this session, or these sessions?
Yes, thank you, Stina, for that, and thank you to all the participants for your interesting inputs. So I was asked to wrap up this webinar dealing with the prospects of potential implications the EU's new battery regulation might have for Norway. So the webinar started with a conversation on the prospects of battery recycling in Norway. Here, the timing, as well as transparency and traceability, was highlighted. And a battery passport development is interesting to follow in the time to come. We then moved on to hear from 3 companies who also are starting to positioning themselves within the European battery market. And here we learned that the carbon footprint mechanism might be seen as an advantage for Norway, but we need to use primary data, and we need to take the whole value chain into consideration. When it comes to the link between energy sourcing and the final product, the battery, this needs to be made clearer, and we should avoid using the guarantees of origin. We have also heard from the Norwegian authorities and how they are following these developments closely, both in Norway and Brussels. So then, how can we connect what we have learned so far today with key questions facing EU policymaking? I would like to highlight 3 elements. First, we have to talk about COVID. As COVID are derailing a lot of industry activities all over Europe, the battery sector seems to be unaffected. And I think this is due to a lot of activities happening and a lot of investments. And activities includes all from securing raw materials to setting up battery factories, and as well as recycling facilities. And we also see Asian and American companies setting up their businesses in Europe. When it comes to investments, the European Battery Alliance and their work on the important project of common European interest should be mentioned. They launched a second project this January, and together these 2 projects are expected to generate around 20 billion euros of private and public investments. And in addition, the recovery funds from tackling the COVID crisis should be mentioned, as the European Commission are pushing the member states to integrate battery projects in their national recovery and resilience plans. So there's lots of activities, and so we don't see this derailing due to COVID. There's lots of actors and there will be competition, but there will also be regulation, which leads me to my second point. And that is how this change from proposing this change from a directive to a regulation. So this proposal of a new battery regulation will replace the battery directive from 2006. The battery directive from 2006 mainly focused on the downstream part of the value chain, battery value chain, but this regulation aims to regulate the entire value chain of the battery. So there's lots of elements added on here. And I also want to mention that a directive sets targets for the EU countries that they should achieve, whereas a regulation is a binding legislative act. It means that it must be applied entirely across the European Union. So it will most likely lead to harmonization of EU rules on batteries. The member states welcomes this circular approach to the battery value chain, but they also highlight that the different capacities of the member states needs to be taken into consideration. Potentially, in order to avoid potential undermining of work already done and system put in place by pioneering member states like Germany, for example. So in general, there should be the burden on producers and public authorities should be avoided. And that leads me to my third and final point, which is the timing of the legislation. As a lot of the member states say that this legislation proposal is too ambitious and it has an unrealistic time frame. And indeed, the Commission has been very ambitious and keep pushing for fast tracking this process. As I say, it's important in order to secure a competitive, sustainable, and resilient battery value chain in Europe. But if it's possible to, but when it will come into place, we don't know yet. Because before that can happen, both the European Parliament and the Council has to approve the regulation proposal. And they have held their first round of discussions, but a lot of things still needs to be discussed. And they might even add amendments to the regulation proposal as it is now. So again, I just want to remind you that this is what they are deciding on now is the frame of the regulation. So there are several provisions in the proposal that will be detailed out on a later stage through these secondary legislations like delegated and implementing acts. And this is something to pay close attention to in the time to come and be part of if possible. So with that, I would again like to thank all the panelists and also everyone for listening in. I think these developments are very interesting to keep following, and I hope you do as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Therese. I think that's a very nice wrap up of it, and I think it's really your final point that is really up in the air. I mean, I think it's really clear that the European Commission is pushing and really wanting this to be ratified early, but then let's see if there is kind of realism and whether that will uphold what once both national levels and the units within the European Commission are going to kind of engage in that. So it'll be interesting to see when it is up and running, this regulation. So, but that's we will end I think this webinar with some final words from Lars Petter Maltby. So please, Lars Petter. And you need to unmute.
We never get used to it, do we? No, I think not much to say from my side. Just to again repeat, thank you for everybody for participating, both the panelists and also all the attendees. I think just one word at the end. I think that this is all under the umbrella of strategic autonomy, meaning that it is very important as part of the European Green Deal and the industrial strategy to ensure that industrial activity is happening within sustainable boundaries in Europe, and that is valid for Norway as well. And I think that some obstacle that may be short-term should not put our focus on the long-term part. And I think that the EU battery regulation is a very important regulation that we have to follow closely in order to be sure to position Norwegian industry into that sphere. So with that, I thank everybody again and have a nice afternoon.